When we're sculpting our objects, and specifically when we're sculpting out the block out form of whatever animal it is that you've chosen, I want you to think about mass, and specifically the weight of our character. All characters, animals, dragons, it doesn't matter, are going to hold their weight somewhere. Where is that weight? How can we describe that weight with the pose that we're selecting to ensure that our audience feels the heaviness of this character? Far too often when we're in the early stages of our sculptures, our objects feel light and thin and wafery because we haven't zeroed in on where the true weight of that character is. So I want you to look at your reference research a little bit and start trying to decode where the central weight of that character is. Doesn't matter if you're doing something small like a lizard or something big like a grizzly bear. It's going to be holding weight somewhere. Where is that location? The easiest way for us to start to understand where the weight and the mass of that character isn't so much about the form, but the relationship between the ground and that mass itself. Here's the central ground plane of our environment here. And the location of its central mass, where it's the heaviest, is probably not too far from that ground plane. Now look at the distance here between these, between the bottom of the belly and the ground itself. It's pretty low. Where it's the lowest, it's suggesting that it's the heaviest. Where it's the highest up here, we're suggesting to our audience that this is much lighter. When we're sculpting mass, consider that distance early on in your discovery process, and I think you're going to serve your model and yourself very, very nicely. Now, when it comes to working with the actual mass itself, spheres are a great place to begin. I love working with spheres. Spheres are a great way for us to describe big, heavy, round objects pretty quickly itself. If something is supposed to be heavy, make it look big. Make it the prominent form, the prominent shape inside of your block out shape, and your audience is going to start to feel that weight. Now, in addition to this distance between the ground plane and the central mass itself, the other big indicator to our audience and to you as the sculptor that establishes that weight are how the other objects in the sculpture are relating to that weight. Notice that back here, the hips of my character and the ankle bone, they're pretty beefy shapes. These are pretty big objects. Look at the size of the ankle way out over here and compare it to the size of the wrist of the arm in the front. The wrist is easily about half the size as the ankle itself. That change in volume suggests that all of the weight, well, not all of it, but a lot of the weight for our character is going to be placed on those hind legs, which in this case, in the sense of a grizzly bear, totally makes sense, right? Because grizzly bears often stand on their hind legs to use their cute little paws to grab things out of trees and bushes and what have you, right? So it makes sense that those back legs have really intense structures so that it can hold all of that weight from its central mass. So it's small little things like this inside of our reference that are going to help you figure out where that mass is. And when you figure that part out from your reference, start replicating it with spheres quite instantly inside of our base sculpture itself. Now, another thing that we can do to suggest that mass is not only just the shape and the size, but their general layout inside the three-dimensional scene itself. Check it out. Shoulder, or excuse me, in this case, hip. Here's the knee, here's the ankle, okay? It's not a straight line, but oh man, it's darn near close to a straight line between all of those joints. If all of those joints were to line up in a perfect straight line, the amount of weight that chain of joints would take would be intense, right? Which makes sense. If it's a big, heavy bear, it's going to need to hold a lot of weight. So we're not seeing this knee way off out over here. If the knee was at an angle like this, let me just get rid of all of this stuff in here. If the knee was way out here, what we would be visually communicating to our audience is that it's going to be lighter. By having it be more of a straight line from the hip all the way down, with the knee maybe just offset here, it's much heavier. The joint structure needs to be almost in a chain to accept that huge amount of weight, okay? So that's a great, very quick way to communicate quite wonderfully to our audience how heavy our objects are. In addition, if you look at it up in the front here, slightly different. We have our shoulder, goes down into our elbow, and goes down into our wrist itself, okay? Now, because of its offset on the back, we're still saying it's heavy, but this entire area, this zone up in here, that's going to be accepting the weight on the shoulder, is not as heavy as what we saw in the rear. So it's okay to make these comparison points within the sculpture. The front is allowed to be lighter than the back, but we need to support that extra mass or that illusion with extra mass with some beefy shapes, some big forms that is going to visually communicate to our audience that this part of our sculpture is much heavier than other parts of our sculpture. Don't forget about the mass. We want our objects to feel real, heavy, influenced and grounded by gravity, and these small little additions that we can make to our sculpture are going to help achieve that goal.